Yeah, so I left the board the same from last week because I get the sense today that we'll probably end up picking up sort of where we left off last week, but it got pretty elevated there towards the end, and I'm hoping that we can continue to elevate it even farther. But I do want to check in with everybody first and see kind of how you got along with, I think I gave some of the exercises as far as being more active mentation within your own environment. And I want to touch base and see how that might have gone for people. And Kevin, you're off the hook. But don't worry, I'm fashioning a new hook for you. Just for you.
Good.
All right. Any experiment with it? Have you, or did you forget? It's okay if you forgot. That happens. We'll talk about that today if you did.
I did experiment with it.
Yes.
I thought it was quite interesting because there were some thoughts that I usually wouldn't have. Looking at something. So, for instance, I was walking on the street. There was this gentleman running. So I started looking at him. Okay, let me see what I could look at him. So I thought that I look at his shoes, and it seemed quite new. And I thought maybe he doesn't run that often. So I wouldn't think about it to go to his shoes or even how often he runs. So I was interested in that way, but I thought it was difficult to stick there, meaning that I would think of something else and maybe my attention would go away from that process.
Right. That's brilliant. That's really good from the standpoint that it kind of demonstrates that when you throw that active aspect towards something, that more and more can come out of it. And if it becomes something kind of naturally engendered in yourself, you'll be so surprised at what begins to show up to you. You know, we may think, oh, what's the value in knowing how long this person has been running, for example, right? What's the value in it? And it's not really about what you're able to detect from a situation as much as it is about the kinds of energies that you're actually consciously utilizing and consciously collecting. What I mean by that is that anytime you do something automatically, that energy is lost for good, right? But anytime you do something with conscious attention to it, you get that energy back. This ties into, really ties into creation itself from the standpoint. This young man sitting over here asked me yesterday the question, how did the universe come about? And that's a good question, right? It is a good question. Yeah, you can't see him, he's off camera, but camera shy today, I guess. But how did the universe come about? And I started off by answering him or responding to him from the standpoint that that's the second question you should be answering. First one is why the universe came about. Right? Because everything, there has to be an electrical signal. There has to be a reason. There's something more core than the how. You know, you ask, how did I build this chair over here? The first question should be why? Why did someone build that chair? Yeah, that sort of thing, because that will give you an idea of what happens. Now, the answer, or at least a good run-in to the idea of why creation is because, and I heard this many years ago, and it never really sat with me until I progressed a bit further in my active mentation towards this work, that God found itself in diminishment through the aspect of time. In other words, God, whatever you conceived that to be, was leaking. Right? And so, first of all, what that says is that time is even God has to play by the rules, right? That are in existence. even prior to creation. So should tell you something about time. But the idea is to solve this problem, and this is a very story-like, but I want you to see the bigger picture of what actually comes into play. But the idea is that God kind of set up this mechanism of mirrors called creation. And what those mirrors do is that everything that leaks out from the source ends up coming back into it. However, not just coming back the way that it is, but coming back through refinement, or in an enriched state. Now, we talked last week about this, how we're in the yellow universe, and there are 5 universes. Someone should say prove it at some point, but there are 5 universes. And we go on this refinement journey, right? We start off here, planetary, as a planetary being. And I'll talk about where you came from in a moment, but just follow this idea as far as the ray of creation goes and the reason for the universe being in place. And then we can talk about how. So you begin an evolutionary journey and you attain a certain level of consciousness that would equate to all planets, in other words, the heliosphere we talked about before. And you continue to go and you grow and rise in your conscious awareness to the point of the sun, and then to the point of the galaxy. And then at some point in time, because you probably remember this board here where there's still space to go, right? On that 3, it just kind of ends there because you can't have a 1 in this universe. But at some point in time, you become so rarefied from a consciousness standpoint that the universe can't contain you anymore. And what happens is, kind of metaphorically, you become a black hole in and of yourself. And in some other universe, as you're being kind of excommunicated from this universe, in some other universe, you appear as a star. And that would still be level 3 because that's what you achieved, right? Or world number 3, in other words, universal in that standpoint, sidereal. But for example, a blue universe has no use for yellow. And so it can't just say, congratulations, you made it to the blue universe. It says, no, take your yellow, but refine. Okay, and so it kicks you all the way down there to planetary level again. And you start a refinement journey, but this time you have a bit of yellow. And you're in a blue universe, you see, and now what's the result? By the time you get back to this core, you're giving the source green, yellow and blue, making green. And then you get kicked out into, the white or the red or so on and so forth, and you continue to do this. And so I don't think it's so much a good idea to think, God, like the guy in the sky with the pocket protector and the 3-piece suit, just creating a universe. What it really is the aspect of God, however you conceive of that, is the universe. Because what's in the middle there is nothing. It's all out here. It's all out in these different 5 universes. And it's through a process of enrichment. Now, if you think about this for a minute, assume, because you don't have a way yet to prove it, but assume that or at least entertain the thought that what I'm saying is actually the case. Then before appearing in this planetary existence, you must have already gone through a number of journeys, because you don't start in the yellow universe. You start in white, and then you go to red, and then you go to blue, and then you go to yellow, and finally green. Okay, so you've already done this white, red, blue, and now you're yellow. You've already done this development journey 4 times in 4 different ways. The fact that you're here means that. Now, because you don't remember is a bit ancillary to the point, because if you did remember, you wouldn't be able to do a development journey. You need that kind of friction. But when I said last week that I am in absolute awe of what you are and what you represent to creation, I mean, I really, really mean that. It's absolutely amazing. It's absolutely beautiful. And here you are making another return journey, but with other aspects and other colors. Now, the how of it, I've already explained before. You know, it starts with a triangle, it moves to a triangle, repeating itself in an upside down triangle, and then thickening and repeating and thickening and repeating, right? I'm going to draw another symbol because this occurs to me. Let's see. Can you all see that? Looks sort of like a diamond, doesn't it? This is the way creation would see a pentagram. If you consider that there are 5 universes, you've got your, you know, your white, red, blue, yellow, green universes in here, then a refinement journey always starts at the thick and works its way into the core and then pops out somewhere else. I've talked about things like the gem rod before and the jeweled way, which is the interplay of the human and a gem or a series of gems. And what you're really looking at here is that's the reason why it's called that, because it's creational from that standpoint. That's how creation would draw a pentagram. We do it the other way because we start at a certain point and try to get to that refined area. You see, we're at the other end of it. This is an inverted pentagram. Yeah. Now, you all with me so far?
Yeah.
Now, I was having a chat. Yeah.
Just a quick note, I'm going to go off camera. I got to do a couple of things around the house, but I'll be back shortly. I'm listening though.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Pleiades and I were having a chat this morning about what might be most useful. And she was very much in tune with what I had been thinking or contemplating already from the standpoint of things need to start at the beginning. Even those people, you know, such as Mark and Serena, for example, that have been in this type of work for a very, very, very long time. It's important to sometimes go back and actually look at the foundations of things. It can be done with a certain amount of elevation, but it still has to start to establish a good foundation. It has to start with some very beginning stuff. And so what I'm inclined to do is to begin a journey of starting with white and then going with red and then blue and then yellow, green, and silver and gold, as far as a specific type of path or a specific type of work that I think might be most useful to this group beginning. Now, do you understand what I mean by beginning in white? Nod or say yes or no, maybe. Okay, I'm getting some maybes. Yeah, kind of. Okay.
I think that's a no for me.
Huh?
I think that's a no for me. And then just a note, Pierce, Kimberly is also on. She's decided to become a member, as I'm sure you
Fantastic.
noticed.
I assumed as much when I saw it this morning at about 4 a.m. and I assumed that was her, but I didn't want to say anything until I knew. So thank you for confirming that, and welcome, Kimberly. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think it'll be super valuable, as you're saying, to. I mean, I think this is for now, but if this really becomes effective, then we're always gonna have a newbie. The hope is we always have a newbie. Every week there's somebody new. Yeah. And I, for one, 100% sure would appreciate a little bit of a touch up ever so often. So thank you.
Fantastic. So here's what I'm on about. It has to do with the white has to do with the first initial process of something. In other words, how you think about things. And I want to share some facts that you may or may not be aware of about just how powerful the mind is And I'm going to wind up eventually into giving some ideas and some experiments that you can try to really harness the power of the white in you, okay, of the mind, the mental aspect. When I say the white, what I'm talking about is one of the 5 centers, being thinking, having to do with the white, and moving to do with the red. Blue is instinctive, yellow emotional, and green sexual. But because we showed up in this form, right, this pentagrammic form, those are it's the template within which we can do any kind of development journey. And if you think back for a moment to when you first started learning to drive a car, especially if it was a stick shift and what that process entailed, whoever was instructing you on how to drive a car probably sat you down in a seat, right, and said, this is the steering wheel, and that's the clutch. If you had a stick, I had one of those ones on the side, but that's the clutch, and that's the brake, and that's the gas, and here's the emergency brake, and here's the stick shifter. And like it starts off as very basic, because you need to understand what it is that you're dealing with before you can actually execute anything with it. And it takes a while, because you can be told something like, as you push the clutch down, you have to let off of the accelerator, otherwise you're going to, spin the engine into an oblivion, and rip the transmission out, and all these other types of things. And just because you know it doesn't necessarily mean that you can do it. I remember, it's like trying to get the hang of it, and you're like giving everybody whiplash and giving yourself whiplash and so on. But the observation in this is that knowing something and being able to do something are 2 different things, but you can't start doing until you know what it is that you need to know, right? And so you take it to the next level, and your moving center gets the hang of it. Now, the job of the moving center is twofold. We'll go back to what the job of the thinking center is, but the job of the moving center is twofold, from the standpoint that it controls your physical movements. In other words, the reason I'm able to walk around the room and move my hands and all this type of stuff is because I have a moving center that can do that. The other thing is, it is wonderful at taking on heavy burdens, because if you jump in the car today and you still had to think about every single little thing, your entire life of driving would be giving everyone whiplash all the time, because the mind can't handle it, right? And so this lovely thing in us called the moving center goes, I got that. I'm multiple, I'm not singular. This is the thing about the mind, or the thinking center, is it's singular, whereas the moving center is multiple. And the evidence of that is that, fast forward a couple of years, and you've been driving for a while, and you can be cruising along, one hand here, another hand looking at the radio, or adjusting, I guess, what is it, MP3 players now, whatever it is, doing that, chit-chatting with someone next to you, got your knee steering while you're rolling down the window, and it can do all of this, and it's not even unsafe. It really is safe, because the moving center is capable of being multiple like that. Now, certain things don't ever go beyond the moving center, and this is especially true in our society, because unless there is something higher attached to it, it really goes just white, red, and ends there. Sometimes blue gets involved in it, but this is starting to get into the territories of something rather rare. And I know many of you know that I studied martial arts for a long time, and it's a very good example of what happens, because a certain point happens in martial arts training where your instructor says, this is how you make a fist, right? And this is how you execute a punch, and so on and so forth. And that's the thinking going, yeah, got it, right? And then you practice thousands and thousands and thousands of repetitions. This is driving it into the moving center. If you do that for a long enough amount of time, then whatever is of value in that from a survival standpoint can go into the instinctive center. Now, the instinctive center is responsible for certain things, like it's also multiple, but not in the way the moving center is. The instinctive center controls respiration. It's the thing that drives you to seek shelter when you're cold, or to get warm when you're cold. It makes your heart beat, all these types of things that you don't ever have to think about. But when it comes across something that gives it additional survival value, because that's its job, keep you living for as long as you possibly can, okay? Then it will take those bits that are useful to it in that way. And so, it's a funny example, I had been practicing martial arts for a very long time, and I was walking underneath a bridge, and all of a sudden, like all these doves, just start like flapping around and coming out. And instead of going, and having this sort of shudder response, my body immediately goes into a stance and is ready to defend itself. Now, this happens so much faster than anything I could have ever thought about. And it has nothing to do with the moving center. It was the instinctive center going, that bit's useful. It's not useful to flinch when something's flying at you, unless you can't get out of the way of it. What is useful is protecting yourself with your hands or whatever the case may be. So you see, that's the job of the instinctive center. You guys happy with this? I'm going to do a run into just basics. Okay.
Yes, good.
Now, the emotional center, for the most part in our society, is all messed up. It's really the one of the worst operating centers that we have, second only probably to the thinking. The emotional center is meant to be singular, just like the mentality is meant to be singular. But we don't use it that way. We separate things into positive emotions and negative emotions, and happy and sad, and this and that and the other thing, when in reality it is supposed to be like this. It's supposed to be like a ball, a conserving ball of energy that every now and then goes, I need this bit, and it goes and connects and brings it back. I need that bit, right? And this is where something very high can come in. I've talked a bit about the emotional center before, in that certain ways of going on. We're not there yet, but what I'm running at here is that it's a process. You have to go white, red, blue, yellow, and then finally green. Now, green having to do with the sexual center. In the lower aspect, like we talked about here last week, if you can see this, the first food, right? It starts with gold, silver, white, red, blue, yellow, green here. And that green there is the energy of reproduction. But there's also a second one coming and a third one here. This one having to do with the potential of something. In other words, the idea of being able to create something. You take a little bit of yellow, a little bit of blue, and you marry them together, and something that is not yellow or blue comes out of it. I can best describe the nature of the sexual center from a development standpoint in terms of chemistry. Because if you take iron filings and you hold a magnet up to them, they're all going to stick to the magnet, right? You've probably done this in dirt as a kid. You kind of pick up a bunch of junk. Yeah. And then if you take something like sulfur, smell it, it's got that rotten egg smell to it. Sprinkle it down, burn it. It kind of burns and smolders and all this type of stuff. They have certain natures about them. And if you put them into a beaker and you shake them up, you can still take a magnet and extract all the iron eventually, right? You can suck it back out, because the nature of iron is to be attracted to magnetic influences. This is what, this ties into art from the standpoint of, this is how probably 99.9% of all art manifests on the planet. It's someone taking something and mechanically mixing it with something else, right? And produces something unique, but it's very still composed of this and composed of that. It hasn't bonded to something yet. Objective art or essence art is a different story. If you take that same sulfur and iron filings and you put them in a beaker and you apply some heat to the bottom of it, what happens is a chemical reaction takes place. And when that chemical reaction is done, if you take a magnet to it, it's not attracted to a magnet anymore. If you try to burn it, it doesn't burn. If you smell it, it doesn't smell like sulfur. It's actually changed in its nature. And this is the idea of what's going on in that center from a higher level. Right? And you can think of it, I mean, it's actually the same, isn't it? Right? A baby doesn't come out as a sperm and an ovum, right? It comes out as something completely different than how it started, doesn't it? Right? So it's the same, really. But we're dealing with higher and lower ends of things. I won't run at the moment into the natures of silver and gold and how it applies in here, because this has to do with the sevenfold permission. And right now we're just focusing on the 5. But having had this knowledge, are you happy now to start at the white and learn a bit more about how it's supposed to function? Yeah, okay. Good. Yeah, thumbs up. So right, that's the right one for that, by the way. This is the finger or digit that processes white force anyway. So good. Yeah, thumbs up are very apropos. I'm going to talk for a moment about things that come to prevent a journey of one's return. That's you. Looks just like me, doesn't it? Let's play a game. Who's played word association game, right? I want each person to do something with me. Since Serena, you and Mark are on my screen at the moment, I want you to just think of the first word that comes to mind. Tell me what it is.
Aura.
Aura. Okay, Mark?
The thing that came to mind was that was a man stickman as opposed to a lady stickman.
Uh-huh, right. That's because I was drawing myself. I thought it was a pretty good
Oh, sorry.
representation.
Okay. I was thinking about Serena and Pleiades and Kimberly.
Right, got it. Okay. What's the first word that comes to your mind? Stickman? Is that what it was?
Stickman, yeah.
Stickman. Okay, good. All right, now, next person, whoever, Mattheus. First word that comes to your mind.
Egg.
Huh?
Egg.
Egg.
Like an egg. Yeah.
Good. All right, Kevin.
Invincible, bulletproof,
Bullet.
tube of
Okay.
light.
I'm just gonna put invince. All right. Sechin. If not, it's okay. Kim, can you chime a word in?
I was thinking Stickman on planet Earth.
Stickman on planet Earth. Okay. Earth. Now, if you're a little sensitive, when I asked you to do that, something very special, something very interesting. Actually, Ty, what did you think of?
I thought of the womb.
Womb. Okay. Pleiades, if you're there, if you're able to, what do you think of? Maybe not. Okay. Something very magical happened. A little spark. As soon as I asked you, think of a word, right? You see this association here. A little spark from you, from your mind, from your mentality, I should say, went and got something and brought it back to you. And that was the association. And if we continued to play this game for a long time, you would kind of feel this idea. But the other thing that you would start to feel is fatigue. Because everything that we connect to, I'm going to give a new set of words now in a moment. Everything that we connect to gives just a bit of energy. Oh, what was your word then?
I agree with Serena. I just thought of aura.
Aura, okay. She can't, her mic isn't working. That's why she came down. Okay. You'll feel a bit of fatigue if you play this for too long, because whatever it is that you connect to, whatever it is that you think about, you give your energy to. I'm going to repeat that one because it's very important for what's coming up. Whatever it is you think about, whatever it is you connect to, you give your energy to. Now, you wake up in the morning and perhaps you think about, someone in your past that you haven't talked to for a long time. Okay. And so you send a little dollop of energy down there, and you think about a meeting or something like that you have coming up in the day, and you send a little dollop of energy there. And you think about how much money is in your bank account and how much, what bills you have to pay, and your spouse, significant other, whatever the case may be, and possibly your children, and what's going on in the world, and coronavirus, and so on 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 and so forth. Right? All of these connections, and they're just constant and nonstop throughout the day. Now, my question is, if that's happening, what's left for you? What's left for you to actually build for yourself a new future? Who can do me a favor really quick? Who can, or maybe you can just recite it. I probably can, but I don't want to bungle it. Can someone look up the Lord's Prayer for me and read it? Just if you're on a computer or near, well, obviously you're near a computer.
Oh,
The Lord's Prayer,
I know what it is.
please.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation.
Yes, right. Good. Excellent. Well done. That is one of the most esoteric sayings in the world right now. But I'm going to focus on the middle and the last bit.
Oh, but
Where it
there's, I'm
says-
sorry, there's one more thing I think is pertinent, and when we're saying Jesus, the light of the body is in the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light.
Yeah, right.
I
Good.
think. Kind of going
I love
with-
it. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
So I want to talk about the daily bread, because I think most of the time people think in terms of, the chow that you get on a daily basis, right? Sitting down at the table, like the actual burrito or whatever it is that you're eating at that point in time, as what's meant in the Lord's Prayer by daily bread, but it's not. What's meant is every morning when you wake up, just after the silver rain kind of comes down and all birds go bananas and whatnot, you're given a dollop of energy to use in that day. Okay. And this is your daily bread, and it comes in, and this is your storehouse that God in creation says, this is your permission to breathe and to exist and to grow and to flourish for the rest of the day. Okay, that's your daily bread. Now, what was the next bit, Kevin, about trespasses? Forgive us our trespasses as we, go ahead. as we have forgiven others. Yeah, basically.
Who trespass against us. That's, yeah, the law of forgiveness.
Right. So now this is interesting. I'm going somewhere with this. It might take me a while to get there. But let's think about the idea of daily bread as your dollop of force allotted to you for the day, and trespasses. Trespasses are never in the future, are they? A trespass is always in the past. Someone did this to me, or I did this, or whatever the case might be. Now let's take this idea of this dollop of energy. And here's how it all works. You'll know what to do with yourself once you get a hold of this. But let's say you connect to something that some harm someone did you, right? Some sort of trespass against you. Or you connect to something that you've done in the past that you feel what's called guilt about. Guilt is nothing more than a depletion, actually. That's all it is, if you look at it electrically, but we'll get there. What you're doing in this sense is you're sending this daily bread, you're sending this force from what you're supposed to be working on today back into the past, and you're powering it. But what you're really doing is, okay, here's your birth. I'm going to just draw a line. If I can do a sideways B here. Here's death. And we'll say you're here. Okay. Now, here. These are all kind of different events. Some of them register in yourself as positive. Some of them register in yourself as negative. Some of them you are proud of. Some of them you feel guilty about, whatever the case might be. But taking the present energy that was given to you today and casting it back there, all it does is reinforce it, because there's a part of you, this thing, these mental hairs, or this ability to connect to something doesn't fall in the category of time. What it's meant to do is it's meant to print you. When I said, what do you see? And you come back with things like, Stickman and Aura and Bubble and, Earth and all of these types of things. That modifies you, because you go and catch something and you bring it into yourself to be able to work and to process. But when you do this, when you connect to something in your past, be it productive or non-productive, you're reinforcing this. So you end up developing this kind of thickness, okay, coming from your past. And all of that sits here at your present. Now, if this is just thick with you constantly projecting back into your younger years or yesteryears or whatever the case is, what does it leave for your future? Probably
Nothing.
just more of this, doesn't it? Because unless you change something right now, today, in that, your future can't be any different than what you've programmed yourself in the past. Now, this works on a DNA level, actually. Literally, it works on a DNA level. I'll give you another example. Are you with this so far?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's true. It's true.
it is true. Here's an aspect. I'm going to teach you all how to do magic. Not like, abracadabra, pulling rabbits out of hats, but actual magic. What is magic? Magic, I suppose, could be described as using the natural laws in your favor to affect an outcome. Okay, I think that's a good definition of it. Now, we've learned in the past that everything has to happen in threes. And so we're going to represent some sort of result as a triangle, and the equipment that you have to produce something into your life, to produce some sort of magic, has to do with your thinking, your emotions, and your moving center. It all starts right here with thinking. Every thought that you have creates an electrical signal. I mean, really, it creates an electrical signal. They can pick it up with, sensitive instruments. Not all of it, because some of it's outside of the spectrum. But that electrical signal creates a certain type of radiation. And this broadcasts down. And do you know what happens when it hits the emotional center? The emotional center picks up that radiation and it responds by producing not a signal, but a chemical. It produces a chemical inside the body that then, okay, every cell, except for red blood cells, one of their primary jobs is to create proteins that turn on and off different bits of your DNA. Do you know that? Your DNA strands come into contact with a certain type of protein and it will flip a bit, right? It'll cause something to become active, or it will suppress a bit and cause something to become passive, you see. And part of that happens through this aspect of the emotional center creating various chemicals. And we call these, like neurotransmitters and hormones and so on and so forth. The idea of like when you're in love, that one's called oxytocin. That's the result. You start thinking about being in love, but the result is the emotional center goes, I know how to handle that. It's called oxytocin, right? And it pumps you full of that, and you have that kind of feeling, in there. But now, so that's the response, transmission, response in the emotional center. But now, if it does not find some sort of physical expression, it tends to subside. It tends to then resolve back into its original electrical signal and its chemical signal, okay? And this is the foundation of all magic, because, all of these creepy, weird books on, do this ritual and do that ritual and perform this act, and, you have to get a consecrated blade or whatever, all that type of stuff. What they're really trying to do is to give a physical expression to the thought and the emotion to complete that triangle. And if you have a strong enough thought about something and allow it to generate a strong enough emotion, and you, while holding that, just jump up and down, you've just made magic, because you gave it physical expression. You've completed that triangle. What you generate in this will happen. Okay, so that's the foundation of magic. It's not a science. I mean, it is a science, but it's not nearly as hard as everybody tends to believe it is, that you have to go through all these types of things. It's very simple. It's the practical use of laws. Now, why am I saying this? Going back to that timeline, daily bread here. Okay, that's a piece of bread with a bite out of it. Daily bread in there. That's meant to be used today. It's not meant to be used for yesterday. The only time that it should be used for yesterday is to correct the now. And I'll give you an example of how that works. Is this boring? Is this good?
Good.
That's what I'm on about. Okay, good. All right. The only time that it's, I won't say good and bad, because it's not ever good and bad. The only time that it is useful to go into your past is if you wish to rewrite it. So like, let's say, for example, that you have some sort of childhood trauma, right? And you find that you're constantly kind of going back, and certain actions in your life are constantly reconnecting you to that point in time. A useful exercise to be able to change your future from this point in time is to change the nature of that. Instead of powering it, instead of dwelling on it, you have the power within your mind, within the ability to think, to change it. Whoever said that you can't go back into your past and imagine something differently than how you have been? Because unless you are completely happy with your life, unless you're, you feel fully just You're already level 3. You're about ready to pop into another universe type of thing. Then what's wrong with going back and rewriting things in yourself? As I said, like those mental hairs, they can do that. They do that every day. We just don't have much control over it, do we? Right? We're always connecting to things in our past. Now, we're not supposed to connect to the future with anything other than what it is we wish to see in the future. If you connect to the future with a sense of dread, with a sense of anxiety, with a sense of stress about what it is that you will encounter, you absolutely will encounter it, because it'll be waiting for you there by the time your X moves to that spot there. All of that loading will be waiting for you. And of course, that's going to happen. So use these powers to rewrite your past or to precast your future. That's the way that the connective ability of the thinking center in the mind should be used. Now, I talked a bit ago about the triangle and the thinking, emotional, and moving aspects of it. And I had mentioned that actually, I'm going to pause and I'm going to go back because I want to share something. And probably many of you already know this, but they've done experiments where they have two groups of people. I'll give a couple of analogies here. They have two groups of people. One, they teach to play kind of a simple piano scale, or sort of sequence or whatever. Actually sit them down at the piano, teach them to do it, and then make them practice it every day for 12 days or whatever the case might be. They take another group of people and they say, close your eyes and visualize a piano in front of you, and visualize your hands doing the kind of scales or whatever the case might be that they're trying to teach, but they don't let them move. Don't let them move whatsoever. And do you know what happens? After the same amount of time, the people who are just imagining playing are every bit as good as the people that were actually physically playing it. And the reason why is because the brain itself doesn't know the difference. It lives in an electrical, unseen world. It has physical results and manifestations, but it lives in an electrical world. It doesn't know the difference. The truth about this is that light isn't entering your brain. Light is hitting something in your eye, which then converts it into a signal, which then your brain interprets, right? Sound is not going into your brain. Everything is just sort of vibrating and working that way. That's the way the brain works. Now, they've done other experiments, and this one, when I learned about this quite some time ago, sort of blew me away. They did a very similar experiment, but they had people just sit still. In fact, they even put casts on them, but they had people sit still, and for 10 minutes a day, imagine that they're doing curls with weights as hard as they possibly could, but they didn't let them move. They actually just had them perfectly still and imagine that they're doing curls. And do you know what they saw? You know what they found? Their muscle mass starts increasing. It went up by like 40% just by imagining. Now, how do you explain that? Other than the fact of how powerful this thing you carry around in this skull of yours actually is. If it can do that, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's amazing. So what this tells me is that you really have to be careful what you think about and what you allow yourself to connect to. And we live in a world that is constantly trying to steal our daily bread, to try and steal that energy from us. If you don't believe me, just go to any Walmart or some other big box store and walk around for an hour and come out and register just how you feel. It's exhausting. It's exhausting because everything is there, like, look at me, buy this, do this, and it's just sap, 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 right? And so one of the most fundamental trainings that you can put yourself through is learning how to be singular. The brain needs to be singular, because if it is in a position where it's constantly, where you're putting the demands on it to constantly connect to this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this, like our society does, what's left for you? You really don't have anything left to actually evolve and grow, right? Mattheus, can I ask you, because you shared sort of the idea that you started observing things that you normally would not have seen. Was there also a physical symptom that went along with that?
I was not aware of it. I didn't register it.
So next time I want you to be sensitive to how you feel from the standpoint of whether you feel more invigorated or more drained, because I'd be willing to.
Definitely more invigorated, definitely.
Yeah,
It
definitely.
gives some, even if I could call it an inner joy that comes with it.
Yes, absolutely correct. Right, because that's your brain working the way that it was designed, your thinking center working the way that it was designed. It was designed to take things in unbiasedly, work on them, not be distracted, not be like, think about this, think about that, right? Like we do, and get a result from it, and then pass that in. And ultimately, you said it caused joy in you. The reason why it caused joy in you is because your emotional center picked it up and created chemicals out of it. Amazing. You did a wonderful thing. And by creating chemicals out of it, it created proteins in the end, because those chemicals enter the cells. The cells generate a particular protein that goes along with that electrical signal. And then it literally will switch on a piece of your DNA. What we think of DNA, what they're discovering about DNA is something that we've been saying here, for 40 years or more, that it can change instantly. It does not, it's not, well, let me put it this way. You actually have in you every ability. I'm talking about, like, people are prone to being better musically inclined, or people are prone to language, or people are prone to this and that. You have absolutely every ability that's available to any human in the world. You have every disease, all of them, right? All at the same time. The only thing that prevents you or allows you is which ones get switched on. And these proteins that go from thinking, right, electrical signal down to a chemical signal into a protein, a physical expression, this law of three type of thing. Those proteins kind of scan the surface of the DNA and go, that's the one that I was generated for. And it will flip a bit. It will flip a bit of that, and it'll turn it on. It'll turn on that feature of the DNA. It happens constantly in you. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, again, it's very, very vital to be careful what you think about, and careful what you connect to, and careful what you allow in yourself. Because if you are constantly connecting to the past, you're only going to get more of that in the future. We've already kind of established that sort of thing. But the other thing is that if, for instance, it has a negative or depressing effect on yourself, your immune system will be lower than it normally could be or should be. If you allow yourself to connect to things like inspiration or joy or love or happiness, or all of these things that we that feel naturally good to us, it literally switches on certain aspects of your DNA that improves your immune system, that makes you non-prone to these types of things. And also, it programs what you expect to encounter in the future. I'll bring up another study. It's called, I think it's called unconscious priming or subconscious priming. They have students, right, university students, kind of walk down this hall, and what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to take a test. It's a very long hallway, and they don't make it obvious, but every 3 feet or so, they have some sort of poster that has some sort of negativity associated with it. You know, someone's hurt, someone's sad, someone's whatever the case might be. And these students walk down the hall and they sit down and they begin to take that test, and they do terrible because they had this kind of connective influence, whether they were conscious of it or not, but they don't do as well. Now, they do the same thing with another similar group of students, but they put all this bright, encouraging stuff, you know, things that would make you feel happy unconsciously as you walk down and you connect to these things. And those students did brilliantly well with it. You know, same basic population. I mean, you can't explain it other than the fact that what you allow yourself to connect to is very important for how you perform as a human entity in all respects. I'm going to pause for a minute. Do we have questions? Is there anything you want me to drill into a bit deeper in this? Sachin, you've got your thinking look again.
No, I agree.
I'm good. I don't have any questions. I'm just writing notes. I have a bunch of questions I'm writing that I will ask at the end if we have time.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So, a cult or a religion or a, you know, whatever the case might be, will oftentimes tell a person what to think instead of how to think. And I hope you can appreciate the difference. Because if you practice certain things in the way that you think, then you can immediately determine if it's useful or if it's not. Okay, so I'm going to share some ideas with you that you can either take up or not, depending on what you wish to do. But there are areas of how to think. And it starts with the idea of the color white. The color white has no bias to it. It just is, right? It's not a little red. It's not a little this. It's not a little that. And that to me is a clue into one of the ways to use the mind. And we started off last week with this notion of this exercise of just taking things in and working with them. Okay, but not jumping to any kind of predetermined conclusions. Let it happen. Let it reveal what it is. But look at things with this unbiased openness and let your mind, let your brains do their job of actually working it and digesting it, sort of thing. Understand what I mean by white? It's actually difficult to explain from the standpoint of, because of the patterns that we're used to connecting to, right? This kind of historical things, and we're used to thinking about things in certain ways. It's very, very difficult to just allow things to be as they are and watch things as they are and observe things as they come in and then digest them without putting some sort of bias upon them. But this is a very essential kind of training to getting the mind and the brains in the thinking center to be able to have some leftover daily bread, if you follow, right? So there's an unbiased aspect to it. Another one is let it be singular. It was designed to be singular. Learn to let your mind, or actually train your mind, if you will, to be singular about something. Have you ever been reading a book and you're kind of going through this paragraph and someone says something to you, right? Significant other or child or whatever the case is, and they need your attention, and, you know, so you like put your finger where you were and you address whatever it was, and then you think it's done and you start reading again. the same paragraph, right? Start reading again, and all of a sudden, blah, 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 and they need something else. And yeah, and you address it. And then you start reading again. Yeah. And you do this a number of times, and pretty soon you're going to have an emotional outburst at that person. Stop talking to me. I'm trying to read. Right? Can't you see this? Like, can you not see that I'm trying to read? Yeah. The reason why is because the brain knows that that's how it's supposed to go on. The brain wants start, middle, conclusion, digestion, pass it on to another center, start, middle, conclusion, digestion, one thing at a time. And this world that we live in is terrible for that. You can't even watch television without being subject to it, because pay attention next time you're watching television at how often the scene changes. They do it at about 1 to 3 second intervals. Every 1 to 3 seconds, you're looking at something, oh, it flashes to something else. You know, the context is staying the same, but flashes to something else, flashes to something else. Really, really, really destructive for the brain. And you know what happens to it? It says, I can't deal with this. Help me, moving center, because this is too much for me. And the moving center goes, oh yeah, sure, happy to oblige. In fact, would you like me to take all of it from you? And the brain, being exhausted, says, yes, please do that. Please just take it all. And so you walk into the grocery store and the clerk says, hi, how are you today? And you say, I'm good, how are you? Right? No thought whatsoever. What if that was a real human being? I'm being playful with this because it is a real human being, but what if that was a real human being actually asking you how you are? It's really very, do you see where I'm going with this? This is where our centers become imbalanced, because now the moving center is doing all of our thinking for us. And this is why it's so easy to walk through life with this kind of dullness. You can walk by the same tree 365 days a year and probably not be able to describe it to somebody. The reason why is because the moving center is not meant to think. It just goes, yep, got that. I was told, this is my job in life. I'm supposed to do all the thinking. And what happens is we just become dullards. Do you know what dullards are, right? We become stupid from not using that faculty the way that it was actually designed to be used. How does one become singular? First of all, do you agree that that might be useful to have that ability to be singular with something? Yeah, good. If anyone's shaking their head no, please tell me. Yeah, okay, right. Got it. Here's the problem. You all know molecules, don't you? Right. You got one atom kind of in close proximity to another atom. How's that? Looks just like a molecule, doesn't it? And what they do, the way that they bind together is that they actually share electrons. Okay, if one is supposed to have, well, it won't show up as 3, but you understand, if one is supposed to have 4 in its outer shell, and another one is also supposed to have 4 in its outer shell, but it's only got 2, it will come into contact with this other atom, and it will be like, hey, I have some extra electrons, go ahead. You can have these, and then when they're done orbiting you, I'll take them back and we'll kind of do this like sharing type of thing. And do you know how much energy it takes to bust that apart, a tremendous amount. If you want to split a molecule, like, okay, for instance, hydrogen and oxygen, that's water, right? Hydrogen, H2O, hydrogen and oxygen is water. There's all these kooks out there that think that they can turn water into gasoline without wasting energy in the process. What they don't understand is that would be like unburning a match. You understand? Because it's already at its bound state. In order to get hydrogen and oxygen separated, you have to put a tremendous amount of energy to peel those two apart so that then they can just be rejoined again by adding energy to them. The reason I'm bringing this up is because what we attach to from this idea of our thinking, what we attach to creates a bond like that, creates this kind of chemical fusion, this bond where you're sharing energy with it, it's sharing its produce with you, and it's in this type of relationship here where it's synchronized together. So that being the case, and being just like the physical world of the electron in that instance, you're going to have to expect to exert energy to break from it. It's going to take energy to break from it. Does that make sense? How? Someone's got to jump in. How, Pierce?
How?
Well, good question. By being singular, by not, first of all, by just taking 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day, or whatever it is that you can afford in your day, to allow your brain life and your mind and thinking center to operate the way that it was intended. People call this meditation. Of a type, it's a certain kind of meditation. If you can spare 5 or 10 minutes a day, get in the habit and practice of going through a gold state where you disconnect from everything. You disconnect from work, you disconnect from your cell phone, you disconnect from, Facebook, you disconnect from me, you disconnect from all of it, okay? And just be in that state, literally for 5 minutes, because if you do that for 5 minutes, I'm gonna put this, watch your mind sometime. Just watch what it does for 5 minutes and how many things it will think about, right? And think about every time it flips into something new, you're kicking some energy that in whatever direction outside of you into that. So my recommendation, start with 5 minutes, maybe increase it to 10 or half an hour, or whatever the case is, but just learn to disconnect. Just learn to actually not disconnect, but just not connect.
Yes. How could you do that? Just observe thoughts or focus on one thoughts to achieve singularity?
Yeah, that's the beginning of it. Because your mind is in, or everyone's mind is in such a pattern of constant chatter, right? In some traditions, they call it the monkey mind, don't they? Because it's just constantly doing something. In the beginning, yes, but if you can, try to observe one thought and keep it there. Well, okay, let me back that up. The first thing is actually useful to just watch what takes place, because this will convince you of how much force you're losing by the way that the mind goes on with things. It doesn't necessarily help you, but if you don't believe it, know it in yourself first, then you're probably unlikely to really feel inspired to change it anyway, right? So that's the first stage, watching one's thoughts. There will come a time after watching your thoughts for a while that you're able to maintain and hold a singularity or hold a single thought. It just happens. It does, because that's how it's supposed to work anyway. After that, you can give your brain a rest and just not let it connect to anything. And I can't even describe what that feels like, but it is incredibly rejuvenating to you. So it's just a matter of practice, you know, and it doesn't have to be like all day, but it's very, very useful. We can go into other areas, right? We're just talking about the mind today. I can go into other areas. For example, I'm going to switch to the moving center for a minute here. I don't know if you watch the way that I pace and walk and this sort of thing, but if you do for any amount of time, you'll probably notice that I don't hold a lot of tension. I have tautness about myself, but there's not stiffness within that. That's deliberate. If you watch me get my coffee cup, it's not right like that. There's a swing to it, a lift up, a swing back down type of thing. I'm diverting for a minute to let your brains process what's been said. This has to do with how to use the moving center and how it can conserve energy, because we talked about this last time, right? All three foods, what do? They just make energy. These hydrogens, what we're talking about with the hydrogens, they're just energy. If you don't have enough energy at the end of the day or at the end of the month or the end of your life, you can't use it for you. It's just like basic physics. There's just nothing left over for you. And so there's two types of training, really. One is how to get more, and that has to do with the correct functioning, the active functioning of centers. Right? This active mentation that we talked about will actually increase the energy flow into your mind so that you have more to work with. And then the second thing is to stop leakage. Stop the leaking. And one of the ways that we leak, actually, almost the only way that we leak, is whenever we do something unconsciously, it's wasting energy. If you're holding attention in a certain part of your body unconsciously, that's just something you'll never get back. It just kind of leaks right out of you. So the more conscious awareness you can place on yourself, then the more energy you'll have at the end of the day. I liken this to a bathtub. With the drain is this size and the spout is this size. This is how most people go on. They have this, trickle coming in and immediately swirls down the drain, and it can't fill up. When the reality of the case is that when you were born, the spout was the same size as the drain. And through certain types of development, you can make the spout bigger than the drain, and that gives you extra. That's not the way people go on, though. Matthias, does that help?
Yes, absolutely. No, I think it's on me to, I do have the 5 minutes a day, so I will see what happens.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Who else wants to chime in for a minute?
Yes, I want to chime in a little bit, just thinking about this, right? Last week, I talked about how all of this is work. What I mean by that is how active awareness, how active thinking, how consciously living, consciously doing anything, is work. And what I'm hearing from the way you explain it is not doing it is actually making you work harder. Like if you're aware, if you're actively aware, you're actively conscious, if you're actively doing anything, then there's less leakage. Like if you're actively aware of what you're doing, then you're not just unconsciously losing energy because somebody distracted you or somebody made claims on your time, money, effort, whatever it is that they made efforts on. They pulled stuff away from you without being aware, which is it's opposite actually, because most people, the way that normal people think, or I don't know what normal, one philosophy of thought is, hey, let just things go by. And that kind of, the meditative part of it talks to that. Like you first learn to just observe, let things go, not try to take control. That's the first part of learning meditation. But the actual the actual, what you've described or what you've said is the right thing to do would be, that is just that's just a step in learning to be just way more aware of just having more awareness. And these are like self-contradictory, at least when you look at the initials, like you're saying be aware, but then you're saying learn meditation and learn to not be aware. So just wanted to chime that in.
No, what I'm saying is, in that regard, that state of meditation is to actually let your mind have a rest now and then, because it will wake up rejuvenated. You know, most people have restless nights and they go to bed. And Pleiades can vouch for this. It takes me all of 15 to 20 seconds to fall asleep once I decide to. I literally lay down and I'm out. She envies it, and other people envy that too in some respects. But the reason why is because I have trained my mind that it's okay to shut down. It's okay to shut off. Do you know what dreams are? A dream is one center talking to another center all night long and not shutting up, right? Not shutting down, I should say, not up, not shutting down. It's the chatter between two centers. Just before dusk, something begins to happen on the planet and gold begins to kind of wash in, okay? And what that's intended to do is to begin to trigger this shutdown in centers. And it happens in a particular order, and I think you can probably work it out now based on what you know. But because certain centers are running on the wrong types of fuel, because, for instance, the moving center is trying to do the job of thinking, the mind is trying to do the job of the emotional center. The emotional center is just a basket case, and the sexual center is all over the place all the time, and so on and so forth, right? It's a complete mess. Sometimes when you go to sleep, or most of the time for some people, when they go to sleep at night, they can't shut them all down. One or two or three or four will stay awake. Maybe the brain shuts down, but one or two or three or four can still stay awake, and they go, blah, 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 right? And they chat from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And you wake up in the morning and go like, God, I had the weirdest dream. Like, it's crazy all over the place. Yeah. And part of the reason for that is because, first of all, the moving center doesn't speak the language of the emotional center. And so it's like, you know, two foreigners trying to chit chat with each other and just barely being able to pick up on what the other one's saying. That's where the weirdness comes from. It's where the imagery comes from that doesn't fit with the mentality of what one actually experienced, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so what I'm on about with this, Sachin, is that the first stage is, I'm not advocating that the mind go to sleep constantly. What I'm advocating is that it gets a break so that it can then be rejuvenated and cast into a particular direction. Imagine what your life would be like if you had complete choice over what it is that you thought about and didn't think about. Can you imagine? What would that be like? Mark and Kevin, are you in the same room? I see like the simultaneous thing going on there.
Yeah, I just have to go take a break for about 5 minutes.
Certainly.
So, certainly.
Okay. One more just comment or observation here for meditation. It's so what do I say? So one way, or there are a lot of ways of meditation. There are a lot of different ways of meditation. What has consistently been proven to work, or is practiced, or is most popular, is what is preached, saying sit still, be calm, be relaxed, and that kind of follow guided meditation, or follow a breathing pattern, or follow music, or
don't just do something, sit there.
But that's not the only form of meditating, because what we're saying is give your brain a break, and you could totally be meditating. I think I'm starting to get to a point where I meditate when I'm working on my backyard, cutting weeds, pulling out blackberry. I'm like, I'm not thinking, my brain's relaxed, I'm doing something physical. Some
You
people,
know what? Yes, and it's occurring to me now that you're saying this, but I should probably strike the word meditation out of it, because the word training might be more appropriate, because we ever since the 1960s, meditation has been a buzzword and it just won't go away.
Yeah.
And no one knows what another person actually means when they hear the word meditation, do they? You know, you've got people like sitting on their butts trying to float, by like hitting their, you know what I mean? Like the bum jumpers. To transcendental meditation, all this type of stuff. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say this is not meditation. This is training.
which feels like work. I mean, that's what it is. It is work. It's just, I guess if people are lazy, they'll just say, oh, it's more work now, I gotta go do this. Okay, fine. Or people who really understand what we're trying to do,
Yeah.
that it's work, but it should be, it's work really, but it's work that makes the rest of life a lot easier. Work that has an amazing payoff, and just, the mind just taking a rest. So in a way, it's rest. It's work. It's work to get rest for the brain. It's kind of,
if you do it right, your body can literally amaze you. It can work all day outside doing the most incredibly strenuous, difficult, just things. And you can be done at the end of the day and feel more energy, more vigor, more vitality from it. Then there's also, and the mind is the same way, the emotions the same way, it's all the same way. Then there's the other side of the scale, that if you're not using these faculties correctly or these centers correctly, then you feel a loss at the end of the day. You feel drained. Yeah. So you're right. It is work. And the reason, but see, even that's a loaded word, isn't it? Because
it's a loaded word, but I mean, what we're trying to kind of really explain is say, hey, there is a lot of value in this. Maybe that's I don't know how to say this. It's work, yes, but if in the beginning, it's going to feel like work. I mean, I know when I started meditation, I had a lot of trouble. Like, oh, this feels, and then within a month or so, I got to the point where if I didn't meditate, my day went like shit. Like if I didn't breathe, when I woke up and I didn't do my I have my own practices, but if I didn't do that, then I would feel drained at the end of the day. But if I did that, it'd be 6 p.m. like, wow, great, let's go do something. Let's go do something. It's 6 p.m. I did meditation and I worked 6-7 hour day. Now I want to go do something. I'm like, where the hell does that energy come from? Like, how can you just do that? And most people are, by the time halfway through the day, 3 p.m. they're like, oh fuck, it's 3. When does the day end? What do our meetings end? When do I go home? And then they go home, and then instead of meditating, they go home and they do something which is even more intense to their brain. They sit in front of the TV and watch that garbage, or they do something else that makes the brain work even harder, that stresses them out, or they watch TV, which is all about violence and bad things, or read something nasty, and it's just like.
So I talked about, I think it was last week, or actually it was the week before, about the 5-piece puzzle. You remember this analogy? Those children's puzzles where they're like 6 pieces or 4 or 5 pieces or whatever. And it's like, you put this here and this here and this here and this here and this here, and it creates this little picture. Talking about for like 2-year-olds and whatnot. In some respects, that's what we're dealing with here, because the idea is that, and this, if you've ever made a puzzle before, the farther along you get, the quicker it goes and the easier it becomes, right? It's only starting out that's difficult. If you get just one of your centers functioning the way that it was supposed to from the way it's designed to, I'll put it that way, you only have 4 more to reckon with after that. If the thinking or the moving or the emotional or instinctive or sexual centers suddenly start doing their job correctly, everything gets that much easier. And then you get the next one going, and everything gets that much easier. And it's, so what you're saying with respect to work is that yes, there is a bit of resistance at the beginning. but the payoff is actually more energy. We're not used to this, right? We're used to you work, you expend energy. Well, guess what? Not everything in the universe does that. For example, light. How does light go 186,282 miles per second through the galaxy without losing any energy? It's because it's functioning as it was designed. And your centers are like that too. If they function as they're designed, they just do it. They just go, right? They don't expend energy that way. Or if they do, it's an investment in something. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It is hard work in the beginning. It's not so hard later on. And even in the beginning, though it feels like hard work, really what you're up against is yourself. We're our own biggest enemies in this regard. You may make the intention that you're going to meditate, or you're going to attempt to be singular with people when you speak with them, or you're going to attempt to do this or attempt to do that. And it's inertia that you're fighting, because if you've never done it all your life and then you intend to do it, remember this law, right? Whatever your intention is, that much force is going to come to resist, because you don't have a triangle with it yet. So yeah, it's inertia. That's all. That's what early work is like. After that, you get inertia going in a different direction, and it becomes easy. And then guess what? All these faculties begin to switch on you, in you. The stupidest expression that I think we have in the general venue of life, known as the esoteric worlds, is extrasensory perception. The reason why I say it's the stupidest expression is because it should not be so. It should not be extrasensory, paranormal. All of these things should just be your senses, should just be normal. And it would be, and it is. Honestly, it is. If you just begin to make minor adjustments and overcome the inertia of the past goings on. Oh, and by the way to overcome the inertia of past goings on is to stop allowing that. Or if you must allow it, if it needs correction, then blot that out and put something in its place. I just busted everything. Put something in its place that is more generative to your future. This is where we started, isn't it? Yeah. Mark, you have such a great smile right now. I can only think that it's like something's opening up. Can I hear from you?
Yeah. One of the things that I've understood for years and years is, even if something appears to be a weird way that something works, it's normally because it's being used in the wrong way. One of the things that you spoke about earlier on was about how, as you got on the blackboard there, you can link back to something that is unfortunate in the past. And I was thinking, why would that be? Why was that system set up? And then what came to mind was that when you spoke about how there are things in the past that are positive, the reason why the system is there to link back into the past is not to connect back to the negative things, but to actually connect back to the positive things, so that you can bring that forward to whatever you're trying to do now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like one of the things that one of the sayings that Theo put out was, "Don't blame me. I didn't invent the system. I'm just telling you how it works."
Yeah.
But it's the whole point of understanding why that system or this system or whatever it is, if there is normally if there is a negative result that can come from something, it's only because we haven't thought about what the positive use of that same thing can be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this ties really because typically what we tend to connect to are emotionally charged events. That's
Yeah.
what actually stores, things in our history. It's not something intellectual. You never have an intellectual memory. There's always emotional content because we'll get into emotion, but emotion is meant to do that. It's meant to load things, right? And if this is why I'm saying go back and rewrite it. It doesn't mean that you have to, I'm not advocating someone lying to themselves. I'm saying that we live in a culture where we don't give ourselves the permission to go back and rewrite things the way that they should have been, the way that we want to carry them forward into the future. It's like we don't give ourselves permission to do that. I mean, isn't it scary, right? If you have some trauma in your childhood and you think to yourself, oh, Pierce, I'm going to go back and I'm going to negate that trauma by nullifying it with something positive that I'm going to put in its place. Now, is that wrong? Why is it so hard to give yourself permission to do that? It does change who you are today. Because you're right, Mark. Well, there's more to it than that, though.
Sure.
Because getting into the realms of things like reincarnation and recurrence and whatnot, the whole reason why it happens is because everything returns to the source of its arising. If you're here and you're constantly loading this type of stuff, right? The majority of your life is focused there. And then you get to the point where you die. What's going to happen is that because of your habitual life, you're so used to being there that then becomes your future. And you do it again and again and again and again. This is called recurrence, where many people could have lived this same very life 1,000,000 times, 10,000 times, whatever the case is.
Right.
Yeah. So that actually powers recurrence. That's not reincarnation. Reincarnation is altogether different from that standpoint. But do you see how that powers recurrence?
Sure. Just to go into that a bit more, are you talking about at the point of death going back and reincarnating in the same body back in the year that you're born? Because this is one of the things that the native American Indians spoke about you can reincarnate
back in time,
or you can reincarnate back.
Yeah, right.
And it's something that I'd often thought about, is it that you would reincarnate and just live the same kind of life, or are you talking about actually reliving that exact life over and over again? And then that causes,
I'll put it this way.
It causes me to think, why would that system be put in place?
I'll explain it very
To
simply.
be needed. Yeah.
I'll explain it very simply.
Okay.
Think of a tree for a moment.
Yeah.
Year after year, leaves come, they go green, they do their thing, and they fall off. And the next year, leaves come, go green, fall off, and so on. As my camera's going to misbehave if I don't stop it.
No, it's okay. That's fine.
So from the standpoint of a leaf, the life of a leaf, it's really not different from the one that was there the year before. It's in the same role, it's serving the same function, it's doing the exact same thing. Yes, you're right that it's not the same leaf, but it is playing the same role of the leaf over and over and over again. Now, this is what recurrence is. What happens is, you get a bit of that spirit force from world 3, right? Sidereal world. You get soul force from the heliosphere, and these kind of show up in a body, and they have a play for 70, whatever, however many odd years. And when you die, they go back, and they go back to Topeth, right? The pot. And what happens is then, because that role is required on the planet, a little eyedropper full of that force goes right back into, whatever year you were born, and does it again. Because see, this is the thing, our view of time is skewed. We only see half of it, or actually a third of it. We only see time as like a line. It's not like that. If you, or I should actually say when you, because we're talking about precasting your future, right? When you have a type of consciousness that sees time for what it is, then you can go forward, backwards, right, left, just as easy as you walk across the room. Yeah. If you want to know something, you can go there and get it, that sort of thing. But anyway, this is why it's such a baffling concept for people to think of time as, like, I'm going to reincarnate back into, when I was born and live the exact same life again. Now, to answer, so that's, think of leaves and trees, and I'll give you a different thing. Reincarnation, not recurrence. Leaves recur. Reincarnation is the seed that falls off of that tree and grows a new one in its place, or grows a new one next to it. That's the difference between recurrence and reincarnation. One is functional, the other is cosmic in its nature. I guess you could say they're both cosmic, but they're of different orders, different octaves of things.
Right.
A leaf, year after year after year, will always look like a leaf. A seed, that's the only time it will ever look like a seed, because it becomes a tree. Yeah. So that's something altogether different, and honestly quite rare. Now, if you are caught in this cycle of recurrence, two things are going on. Two things are going on in this, well, three, but I won't talk about the third. The two major influences happening can be looked at like this. And one influence is called fate, and the other one is called accident. Now, fate is what you were meant to do. In other words, Mark, you showed up at XYZ day, and this was what Mark was supposed to do, and you keel over someday, and then you move on to the next level. That's the fate of every person ever born, because remember, we come from world 3. That's the sparkiness, right? But because of the nature of the environment that we live in, there's also accident, and accident touches fate quite often, to the point where it can take someone off of this and suck it down into its own path. And accident is literally that. It's just this aspect of the universe that is unpredictable, because if it was predictable, it would never go anywhere. You see, the thing about God, whatever that is to you, is that it doesn't know what you will be. Now, that might contradict what you think I just said about fate, but we are still in a growing universe. It's still going. It's actually an infant, right, at this phase, even though it's arguably 13.8 billion years old. It's still just a, maybe even a fetus at this point. So from that standpoint, God doesn't know what you will become, or what Serena or any of the rest of you will become. And the reason why is because he introduced something called accident, of what happens if Mark encounters this in this life, or Mark encounters that in this life, or so on and so forth. Just kind of like a general sprinkle of chaos going on to make things interesting and to make things actually growable. If it didn't exist, the universe would be inert. in the end. It wouldn't have the opportunity to learn from itself, to learn from its own experience
Okay.
as organic life, be it human or not. So yes, it is possible for you to recur back in this time, but what ends up happening is that you just might be fortunate enough to encounter enough accidents to shock you back into your fate, as opposed to just becoming part of the river of accident. And if that happens, and if you're able to hold on to it and have this consciousness for enough time, what you can do is you can divert, for the most part, accident from interfering. And so what happens is that instead of it crossing your path, your destiny, whatever you want to call it, you have a condition set up to where certain things do not cross, but other things do, because they will be beneficial to your development. And this is why one of the very, very, very first things a person should do in this work is to develop in themselves their will have and won't have areas, what they will and they will not have in their life. And the reason for that is because it creates this barrier. If you find yourself on the right track to offer a return to God in creation, that's the only thing that's going to keep those accidents out. Now, what I mean by this is as follows. Let's say, give an example. I had a center here and I had 50, 40, whatever people showing up on a fairly regular basis. And then COVID hit, right? And it wasn't, in America, they have this this paycheck protection kind of thing. And you know, it's supposed to compensate businesses, but it just so happened that I started up this center at the time that COVID was coming into things. Okay, now that's obviously accident, right? Just like you can't predict that. You don't see it coming, that sort of thing. But I didn't qualify for the paycheck protection thing, and so ended up losing, you know, tens of thousands of dollars in trying to make that happen, and no one could come. And then, you know, one thing after another after another. Now, I'm bringing this up from the standpoint of without standards in myself of how I will react to that, then it could just as easily have sucked me back down into this life. Okay. Unfortunate things are going to come, and you know, you might get a tax audit, or you might get this or that, you know, crop up, and that's okay. That's just the way life works. But if you have standards in how you will deal and what you will deal in things, you can prevent those from actually impacting you and sucking you out of your fate into an accidental life. Yeah. Is that making sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
From particularly from the point of view of the will have and won't have areas, because when you've got an issue and an example like you just made, it would be so easy to have had really bad response to having put all that money in. And then I can see that not just with yourself, but with many other businesses, so to speak, that just hypothetically say that you were, say, 2 weeks out from being able to qualify.
Yeah.
How a person would react if you were just 1 day out. That would have been even more of a frustration.
Yeah.
Without having those, I will not respond in this way, I will respond in that way. I can see the importance of building that in the mentality so as to create that barrier of things that you will not allow in.
Yeah, will have and won't have areas is really nothing more than a certain type of shielding,
Mm,
because it prevents accident from disrupting your destiny, your path. But the
Yeah.
thing about it is that you can't do it retroactively or at the time of it. You have to do it in advance. And this takes a certain amount of cleverness and a certain amount of wherewithal to be able to predict everything that could possibly happen to you. It's almost like a master chess game. You know how, well,
Queen's
you
Gambit.
take someone who's really good at chess and they see the board, they see all of these possible outcomes. And if, the opponent moves the bishop here, then I'll, castle. If they move their rook out, if they, whatever the case is, right? They have all of these different scenarios that could play out in there. That's almost what developing will have and won't have areas is all about. And it's difficult because it's really difficult to predict, but you have to look at your life. And this is where the mentality and being singular about something can really come in, because you have to look at your life with a certain degree of honesty and get rid of self-deceit about where things are in your life and in the universe, and say, wow, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. And you put yourself in that situation. And this goes back to this, right? Because now we're talking about this line, and I didn't go here yet, but where you forecast, if XYZ happens, as a standard, I will not deal in level 6 in the astral light, especially when it comes to work, this work, right? I will not deal in that. And having already had that in me, then by the time I met something that would normally cause a person to go into a sense of gain and loss, which is the chief feature of level 6 of the astral light, I already had a gift waiting there for me that it wasn't going to deter. Yeah. But you have to kind of treat your life like that. So again, Sachin, it's work, but it's such a brilliant work. It really is.
Oh, I am completely agreeing with everything you said. I'm just instigating conversation. everything you
troublemaker. Trouble.
Chris, I have to go.
100%
Yes.
agreed.
Matthias, okay.
Yeah, I will catch up on when the video comes.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye all.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
There's a kind of just a lot of different ways of how this is said, right? There's a lot of things people say. It's like, hey, people think successful people are lucky, and they were in the right place at the right time to get the opportunity. They were, but so were you. So is everybody. Everybody has a chance. Everybody has an opportunity. There isn't a shortage of opportunity. It is what you do with opportunity. It is how much work you do. It is how prepared you are. It is how ready in what different ways you are. Like you were explaining your thing, right? You couldn't even have done the centers if you were not prepared. And that hasn't set you back. It has set you back. Not set you back. I don't mean that it didn't hurt you. I mean that you're here you are doing it again. Like you're never going to stop. Like I'm never going to stop. Because I know that I'm going to put in the work. I know I'm going to be prepared. I know I'm going to have my accidents. That's how it goes. But I'm also going to have good accidents, not just the bad ones, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm in a place where I'm prepared, if I'm ready, and then the first good accident that drops in my lap, that's it. I'm successful. That's all it takes. One. Because after that, the next time you're in a position where an accident can derail you, it won't. Because you've been successful once. You've got to a point where you've got some capital. I'm just using a simple word. You've got some energy, whatever you want to use. You've got a resource pool that is available to you that you can fall back on. And that's...
Let me ask you a question. Who here plays the lottery? Anybody play lottery? No? Okay. Yeah, okay. Now and then. Right, fine. Nothing wrong with it. Because Sachin, you bring up an interesting point. Do you already have in place, for those who play the lottery, and this example goes everywhere, honestly, do you already have in place your will have and won't have areas in the event that you strike the winning ticket? you $23 million or whatever the case might be. Most people don't. And the reason why I say this is because someone can win the lottery and you check back with them in 5 years and, they're broke and homeless and have all sorts of diseases and, whatever the case might be. And you would think, God, I'm a raging success all of a sudden, right? But if you don't go into it with some sort of precast, if you're playing the lottery, this gets into another aspect, so I'm going to come back to it. But if you're playing the lottery and you don't have your will have and won't have areas in place, you are really playing the lottery, meaning you're playing Russian roulette, okay, at that point in time, that kind of lottery. In this, so right, absolutely, Sachin, it's all fundamental. And honestly, if you want to be a millionaire, you do so by hanging out with millionaires. Seriously, that's how, because what you'll receive is the radiation. If you want to be on a development journey, you do so by hanging out with others that are on a development journey. We receive by radiation. People always say, learn from me, learn my lessons, take my advice. It's all nonsense. I don't think there's ever been anybody in the history of human civilization that has ever learned from advice from someone else. It just doesn't happen. We learn by experience. That's all there is to it. That's why it's no good telling people what to do. You should blah, 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 right? Because they either will or they won't, depending on how they're wired. In any event, this brings up in me something to do with daydreaming and imagination and what the difference is, because this does tie into, I'm really on about white today, very important. Daydreaming fundamentally is the thinking center or the mentality stealing energy from either the emotional or the sexual center, depending on the nature of the daydream. And you can tell the difference between imagination and daydreaming as to whether or not it can actually happen. For example, take winning the lottery. Everyone who plays the lottery has this conversation in their head at some point in time. If I win the lottery, I'm going to XYZ, right? Now, that's all well and good if you're actually playing the lottery. That could lead to standards, and that is imagination, which has a power to it. And we'll discuss that in a minute. It has to do with future, what you leave for yourself in the future. But for someone like me to say, if I win the lottery, I'm going to blah, 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 and like go through this whole like 30-minute idea type of thing in myself about what Pierce would do if he won the lottery, and then not actually go ever buy a lottery ticket, that's daydreaming, because it can't happen. If I don't buy a lot, I mean, unless I, trip and fall over one and it just happens to be the winning one. I mean, it's so unlikely, right? That's daydreaming. I'll give you another example of daydreaming. So what that is it's an abuse of the thinking center, because it's not meant to run on that kind of octane. And it depletes the other centers that it's robbing from. Who here has had this happen? This is just awesome when you catch yourself doing this. You get into some sort of conflict with somebody, whether it be at work or just wherever, right? I mean, this happens to us. We get into a conflict with someone, and then for the next 5 hours, for the rest of the day, or whatever the case is, you're just rattling around in your mind like, oh, if I had only said this, and if I had only said that. And if you listen very carefully, you'll actually be holding a two-sided conversation in your own damn head about it, right? Where you hear yourself talking something and then you're like, oh, good comeback, Pierce. And then you hear them respond and you're like, and you're doing this whole kind of dance up here. Daydreaming. It's already in the past. The fact is you didn't say that. What that is the emotional center got a little punch, and the thinking center went, well, shit, I'm gonna, run with this energy because it's out of balance. And you will hear this process in yourself of, well, I said this and then he said that and she said this and I said that, and like this banter. It's freaking ridiculous, but we do it. We all do it. And that's daydreaming. Daydreaming is a waste. Imagination, if you know the science of it, isn't. And imagination comes down to having a criteria in oneself. Imagination doesn't happen in the past. Daydreaming either happens in the past or an impossible future. That's where daydreaming occurs. Daydreaming is always in something that cannot ever be changed. You understand what I mean? Impossible future. What am I going to do if I win the lottery and I never play the lottery, right? Impossible future. Imagination should be accompanied with a criteria. And what I mean by that is, just like this, you can leave yourself gifts. Let me draw time in a different way. This is the present. This is more accurate of what time looks like in the way that we process and perceive things. This is the past, static, stationary, unless you actually do a specific work to go back and change things. For the most part, it just is what it is, right? Your present is this thin veil between everything that could happen in this cone of future and everything that has happened in the line of the past. Do you follow so far? Because something could happen in your life and you might end up on this timeline, okay? Something else could happen right very now, yeah? And you might end up on this one, or this one, or this one, or this one. The art of imagination is to leave yourself packages. So by developing a standard, and will have and won't have areas, what it does is it deposits all kinds of gifts for you, waiting for you, so that if this happens and then you encounter X, Y, and Z, then you know how to deal with it because you've already done the work here or somewhere back here. If this happens and these gifts, and I'm saying gifts like, troubles, right? Because they are gifts. But these gifts come to us, then you have presents waiting for you. It's like you're your own Santa Claus if you do this work, right? But you don't know what you're going to get. That's cool. So are we clear on imagination versus daydreaming?
Pierce,
Yeah.
question on that.
Hello.
Oh, yes, hello.
See, I only get 4 people on my screen, so I don't even know who's here and who's not.
Yes,
Welcome.
hello, everyone.
Good to see you.
In that scenario, if you have those particular packages or will haves, won't haves, are we potentially increasing the likelihood of a particular timeline over another timeline?
Yes and no. And I hate to answer that way, but it really is yes and no. Because if you load, here's the other thing too. This goes back to what I was saying about the electrical signal that the thinking center produces, which is followed up by a chemical signal, which the emotional center produces, which is followed by a physical action on our state of being, right? Even down to the DNA level, if you were here for that. Did you join from the beginning?
No, I came late.
Okay.
But I can follow you.
Yes, right. You do make yourself more prone to certain things based on what you think about. And it all begins with thinking. It's been said to the effect of, for the wise man, to think it is to create it, and confirmed by a physical action. Yeah. And it's very true, and goes into like what magic really is, if you want to talk about natural magic, natural law. But if you're used to connecting to things like depression, or you're used to connecting to someone did you wrong, or I'm always getting screwed, or whatever, what's going to happen in you from a cellular level is that you will create more of that future. And the reason why is because nature abhors a vacuum. What I mean by that is that if you suddenly shift your thinking and stop producing these peptides, which alter your DNA and do all this type of stuff, something in you is going to miss it. If you have a history and a love of, being depressed or whatever the case is, right? And you go, I'm no longer going to be depressed, and you deny yourself that, the weight of what starts happening, something in you is going to feel like it's starving to death. And it's going to come back with a vengeance and make you even more depressed, isn't it? Now, you say, well, why in the world would I do that? That's so unhealthy. Well, it's not about you. It's just about the way the natural laws work. You have to put something else in its place. Now, if you know the art of how to do it, and you can learn to be singular in your thinking, you can heavily load one particular future over another in this, because if you get rid of something here, and you have a bunch of something up in here that can take its place, and you have less of something here and even less of something down here, where's it going to go? You're going to go in that direction, and that becomes your future. So, The Secret, right? I mean, it's become, not so much now, but it's become such a fad, hasn't it? Like, you just think it and will it into being and all that type of stuff. Well, yes and no. This is going back to that. The reason why it, generally speaking, doesn't work for people is because they're trying to add to instead of replace. Meaning that unless you address the things that got you to this point in time, and replace them with something that will get you somewhere else in time, it's not going to do any good to just add to. I wish for $1 million, I wish for $1 million, I wish for $1 million. And the whole time you're completely horrible with money, or whatever the case is. Wish all you want, and you might actually end up in this time frame for a little while, but what's going to happen is you're going to still be horrible with money and end up right back in this line, you see. The way to mitigate that is to not add to, but replace one thing with another. And it does take work. Like I said in the beginning with these chemical components, H2O, right? They're bound together very, very strongly, and it takes a whole lot of energy to bring them back into hydrogen and oxygen. That's the way things work. And so, yeah, if a person enters a way or a path and they're not prepared to invest the energy in the things that they are connected to break those things that are not useful, then really it's a waste of time.
I'm wondering if there's also a deletion process, right? Distinct from repression, not repression. Because I find that as you go, if you do this type of work, there's a simplification alongside it. So I'm wondering if it's also less complex.
Did you say leaching process?
No, deletion.
Deletion.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But distinct from repression, not psychological repression.
Well, okay. That's interesting too. Deletion can only happen if you have enough power in the present to go back and change your past, which you can do by thinking differently about your past. You can delete trauma. You really can.
Yeah.
God, the worst thing, I'll tell you what, in roughly like the 1970s, 80s, and a bit of the 90s, the whole fad with psychology was this sort of revivification of childhood trauma. And horrible idea. You know how many people ended up committing suicide in the end because they just going back and they're like, well, get into those feelings of how that felt when you were being abused or whatever the case is. Terrible idea, because what it does is it adds even more weight to what brought them to this state in the present. But if you do it a different way, You can use the same technique, but with a different result by saying, instead of revivifying, you rewrite it and bring that into your present. So that's where deletion comes into it. Now, repression of something can be extremely useful if you have a certain level of mastery in the emotional center. If you don't have a certain level of mastery in the emotional center, you're going to blow holes in your complex. Like, I'm talking like literally ulcers and whatnot. People who repress their emotions, there is an art of having an uncomfortable emotion and refusing to express it. But you have to know how to digest it, because if you just repress it, then it's going to come out somewhere, isn't it? Right. And this goes back to this, because you can take, for instance, we all have or have had in the past someone that we work with that just fundamentally, on an essence level, rubs us completely the wrong way. And it aggravates and irritates us to no end. We've all had that kind of person in our life at one point in time or another. If you find yourself in a position where they're your superior and it is inappropriate for you to express your disdain for what they are or how they go on or whatever, you're going to end up with a whole lot of health problems, generally speaking, and you're going to end up leaving that situation, either under medical or duress, or some sort of situation will blow you out of there. But another approach is that you can actually seek it. You can actually seek it if you know how to digest it, if you know how to take that antagonism that you feel and let it release its energy into you so that you can then refine it. This is like emotional alchemy is what I'm talking about here, but you can actually refine that into a certain type of vitality that you almost cannot get anywhere else. It's so vibrant. And you do that by consciously choosing not to express those emotions. In fact, you do that by playing a conscious, self-chosen role when you're in situations like that. So you decide the most effective thing for that situation is to be gregarious, love this guy, wonderful, God, can't get enough of him, always telling that same stupid joke over and over again. I just love it every time I hear it, right? Sort of thing. But this has to do with the idea of playing a conscious role over an unconscious response, right? And sometimes people unconsciously go into the avenue of repression because of fear of reprisal, or what might happen to them, or just fear of conflict in general. Right? So we're very complex things, aren't we? Where does that leave you?
Oh, well, it reminds me of the Stoic philosopher. I forgot his name, but he said, if anybody, ever tells you your fault, or talks about them, say, well, thank God you don't know all my other faults, so you would have mentioned them too. Right. So a lot of it has to do with your attitude towards, the boss or whatever, that annoying guy.
Yeah. But it all happens here first. This is why I'm starting
here first.
Yeah.
Yes. And with what you said too about putting energy to that, to foresee that information, or foresee that possibility, or I guess you have to first create the possibility or be able to see it strategically and then say, well, that might happen. So I'll put some positive energy there. And
I want you all to do something for me. I want you all to do, thank you, because you brought up a really powerful, great exercise. I want you all to practice trying something for me. And it's very, very simple. You don't have to do it now, but stand somewhere, stand in a room where you've got at least 5 steps in front of you, and visualize yourself standing over there, 5 steps in front of yourself, and visualize and imagine, right? That's the right word, isn't it? But visualize or imagine or pretend even that you have more opportunities, or that you are more developed or more clairvoyant or anything that you wish to have, okay, put it there, because literally that's 5 steps away, but it is your future nonetheless. And it's extremely obtainable. Barring an earthquake, you'll probably get there, right? But practice this because it's so useful. 5 steps ahead of you that you are going to feel differently. You are going to know something differently. And then once you have that strong enough in you, and you can see that, take your 5 steps. Wow. I'm saying wow literally, because it was there waiting for me. It's an easy thing to start. What I left there 2 minutes ago was waiting there for me. And now I'm more enhanced than what I was 2 minutes ago.
Wow.
You can do this. This is easy, right? Who doesn't have the room to walk 5 steps in their home?
Practice.
Or somewhere.
I'm curious, what did you generally, what did you like put there in your mind? You know?
Yeah, what I was putting there is to be more effective in what I'm doing right now.
Oh.
And I felt it come in.
Okay. Okay. So you can put anything there, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Leave yourself a Christmas gift or birthday gift or a 5-step gift.
I want to be healthier. I want to be more alert or more conscious, or I want to be stronger or faster, whatever.
Yeah. Now, let
Gotcha.
me go back to the idea of natural law, natural magic in the explanation of how that worked. I started off earlier, and for the sake of Stuart, I'm going to repeat a bit of this. You know, you get all these crazy, creepy books of, you know, you want to do some sort of ritual and you have to, you know, walk around your altar 5 times and bring out your sword, you know, and draw pentagrams and whatever the case may be to the 4 corners and all this kind of stuff. When the actuality of it is that if you first think it, then feel it, and then give it any kind of physical expression whatsoever, you'll get it. Because all 3 of those have to be. And so literally, you know, you can set an intention and tug your ear while grabbing your foot and hopping up and down 3 times. And people think, oh, well, you know, that's not high magic, right? In their stupid robes and all this type of stuff. That's not high magic. But the truth is that if that was the right physical response to what you were thinking and feeling, it absolutely is. It absolutely is magic. Because you've created and completed a triangle. Think, emote, move. Think, emote, do. That's, I mean, literally, you could take all the 100,000 books on magic with a K or a C or however they want to spell it that's been published over the last 1,500 years and boil it down to that. You don't need to carry all those tomes around with you. You don't need to learn Hebrew. You don't need to cast your own sword and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I'm explaining that because what I just did there was a bit of magic. Do you see? What I did there was I thought it, I felt it, and then I walked into it. And that's what made it happen. Cool, huh?
Yeah.
I do hope you all try it. And I hope you actually make a discipline out of it. But don't let it become a moving center thing, okay? Do actually think, feel, do. Don't just do. That's a very powerful exercise that is really, really easy to do.
Oh, one more thing on that. It just occurred to me. An experience from, oh gosh, 30 years ago made sense with when you were saying that. My great uncle Robert, and I just put these together now, was in military intelligence in World War II. So I guess he was kind of imagining those scenarios But what
Yeah.
I noticed is that with him, he was like the smartest guy in the town where he lived. Everybody was like, wow, you're so smart. And he didn't know anything about construction, but whenever I get to a step, he'd always be ready for me and say, now you got to do this, this, and this. And I wondered, and it occurred to me, it's like he's the kind of guy that thinks everything out ahead of time. So when you get to that point in time, he's already there, prepared for that moment.
Yeah.
And I thought, he was like a wizard, a mental wizard. But now I see why, because of his experience, I think in military intelligence, they have to plan out what the enemy's going to do, and they got to make, plan out their counter moves and this scenario and that scenario. So he was applying that law that you're talking about, So yeah, he was smarter than everybody else because he used those principles in life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very practical, as evidence as proved by my great uncle Robert.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
Yeah, Piers.
Yeah.
Just to hang on, I'll start again. Something that just occurred to me is with this thing about will have and won't have areas. By doing that 5-step movement would actually reinforce what has been decided upon in those areas, rather than just writing it down on a piece of paper.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure you've been exposed to the idea of tests and devotions. Yes.
Yeah.
Where you jot something down before you go to sleep and that sort of thing. It's the same type of magic actually as that. You can also just do that. You don't have to write it down. You understand, writing is a physical act that takes that thought and that emotion and does something physically with it. Same kind of magic in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. What else would be useful? It's actually very powerful. I do hope you try it, and I do hope you make it do your 5-minute meditation. No, we scratched the word meditation. Do your 5-minute mentation. MEN, mentation, not meditation. There's a reason why I put it that way, but try that. See if you can get things to just be quiet for a minute. And try walking 5 steps. That exercise. Cats do this, if you can see very well electrically, cats do something very, very amazing. Oh, really pretty, actually. You see a kitty cat sitting kind of down on the floor, and it's eyeballing some objective that it's going to get to. And it doesn't just go boing, 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 right? Usually, unless it's been really habitually trained to do so, but it wants to get on top of that thing, whatever it is. And you watch it and it'll go, and then do it, right? Now, why couldn't it do it on the first or second or third little lunge that it made? Because the signal wasn't there yet. It had not cast itself. And if you see electrically, what you'll see is a cat jump out of its eyes up to that place that it's projecting to be. And until that cat makes it, until that cat actually lands there and doesn't like mess it up and fall off the thing or whatever, it won't make the jump. But if you see electrically, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. You see another cat go like that. It's not an astral body, but it's similar. So yeah, cats do this. Cats will precast what they're going to do and then do it. So powerful. Gosh, so powerful. I mean this in like all aspects of your life. What would it be like if you woke up in the morning and instead of just letting life happen to you, you have a work meeting, or how you have this appointment or that appointment or whatever, if you just spent a few minutes engineering in yourself how you would be, how you will be, and what sorts of things you will encounter, how you'll feel, and all those sorts of things, because most people have a schedule. Most people know generally what they're going to do in the day when they wake up, but they give it no heed, really. For the most part, people just look at their calendar and go, shit, I have this meeting, or whatever the case is. Oh, I forgot I have to do this today, right? Type of thing. What if instead you engineer a future self to be there so that by the time you get there, you've also won something for yourself in the process? Yeah. Just getting a sense. Steward, come in with more, please.
Okay. Well, what I'm hearing as I weave this together, right? It's, if I could take the past, present, future, the trauma component.
Yeah.
Is that, and even by taking the steps, what we're doing is anticipating the future, right? Potentially clairvoyanting the future. Depends what part of the self is doing it. And then in so doing, and maybe I'm introducing a new thing here, but from that present point, going, also rewriting the past. So the idea is you're not defining your present moment by what you did in the past. You're defining yourself from the anticipation of the future.
Yeah.
That rewrites the past, because you're not the person you are today, you're the person that you're projecting to be tomorrow, or at least you're in touch with it. If for those of the reference, and kind of an opal filament.
Yeah. You know what it's really founded in is the idea of a self-chosen name. Do you realize this, that many of you have self-chosen names? Pierce is my self-chosen name. I go by a different one when I work. But I wonder how many of you have reheated the original reason why you came up with a self-chosen name to begin with, because it's exactly the same exercise. What you did was when you chose a name, you created a future you that you were then going to take certain bits and pieces and walk into. And in so doing, you also created another you that can deal with what needs to be dealt with without affecting your actual future, because we are multiple. Now I did harp on being singular in the mentality, but an aspect of the mental body is actually not that way. The mental body is what you're exercising when you do an exercise like that, and it's also the mental body that should be loaded into your self-chosen name, because your name is your future. Right? I become Pierce. I become Pierce through a gradual progression. So here's another thing too. The idea of hard work, Sachin, as it comes in, is skewed from the standpoint that you should never be looking to make too big of a jump. You should always be making small steps in the same direction for the rest of your life. I've seen so many people join a work like this and they become exuberantly gung-ho about it. I'm going to change absolutely everything about my life, tomorrow, and it's all going to be different. And, this excitement boils up in people, especially younger people. And they intend to end up 5 states away in 5 minutes, and it just can't happen. And so what happens is a burnout that takes place. The right way of development is 1 foot in front of the other, in front of the other, in front of the other, with the constant surveillance on, am I still heading the direction I need to? Yeah, not a big leap.
It's aggregation and division, the first law.
Say again, please.
It's aggregation and division. The first,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
you can't go to step 5. Like, you can't go start building the roof until you've got a really good foundation and your beams. You can't go unless you have a structure. If you do,
Yeah, you know what's funny? We're so sensible about this when it comes to the physical realms of reality, right? Like, we're so sensible about it. No one builds a house from the roof down. No one thinks that they can jump, from Colorado to New York in one jump, right? But when it comes to a personal development journey, everyone thinks the rules are suddenly different, and they're just not.
yeah, because everybody sees somebody else and they're like, hey, I want that. That's what I want. And they hear somebody like yourself tell, yeah, it's possible. And they're like, yeah, great, it's possible. So I'm going to get it right away. Nobody sees the work. Nobody sees you go through the steps. Nobody sees you. This is kind of going back to what I said earlier. Like, people see successful people and they say, yes, I want to be like that. You don't see all the work you put in. People see successful athletes, go hit Olympic. Michael Phelps, 7 gold medals. They don't see the 8 years he busted ass getting physically trained and then the 2 Olympics that he won. They're like, hey, I can do that. Yeah, you can do that if you put in the work. What about all the work? Like, that's gotta be put in. And that's why I keep coming back. It's like, well, start small, start one simple step, make it a habit, build on it. And then that adds up. Once it becomes a habit, it's not work anymore. It's just a habit. You're just doing it. And then the results and the impact just starts becoming way bigger. In the beginning, it takes a long time to get the smallest impact. It takes a lot of work because you don't know how to do it. Once you start doing it, as you start going further, every little jump is just so much bigger because you're just starting.
So I do need to you're absolutely correct. I'm going to refine something that you said, though, because it does need a bit of caution in one respect, that when you say it becomes a habit, you need to spend a lot of time deciding what will become habitual and what will still remain remain in one's consciousness. Because, like, for instance, a person can decide that they're going to, do yoga, or they're going to meditate, or they're going to do whatever. And in the very beginning of that, because it's a struggle and because it's difficult and something that they have to work to make sure that they do every day, it's got so much juice in it, right? It can do so much for them. But if a person isn't careful, they can forget that they have 5 centers and just let the moving center take it all, because the moving center is the most greedy center in your entire complex. It will try to do all of it. And you find someone who can go through, yoga, or who can meditate, or who can do whatever these disciplines are, but they hit a wall, they hit a plateau of development where they cannot go any further. And that's because they're doing it from the wrong part of themselves. So yes, true. What you're saying is true, that you do need to develop a habitual life, but you also need to draw a line between what should be habitual and what should remain conscious.
I think the key here, and I think you're absolutely right. I see myself doing that sometimes, where I do yoga and it's like, this didn't feel as good. Well, it didn't feel as good because you're just going through the motions. You're just doing this poses, and then at the end of it, like, what is that? What is that kink in the lower back? Well, that's because it's like you're saying, I'm not engaging all the centers. What I've seen useful there is consciously see when it's becoming robotic. Consciously think through, like, wait a minute, I did that, but I'm automating it. So maybe now, how do I make it more difficult? Like, how do I add a little wrinkle to it so that I have to actively engage? How do I say, oh, I know how to breathe. I know how to breathe 6 in and 8 out. Now, is the next step go 8 in, 10 out? Or is the next step, do a different technique, do something different? Like, how do I keep it growing? How do I keep it more challenging? How do I keep it more engaging? Because if I don't, then it'll become automatic. My moving center takes over and it starts to lose value.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is very, very important in this work, and I don't know if any of you have really encountered it, maybe you have, but it's probably not likely, that if you're not doing it with at least 3 parts of you, you're actually not doing it. In other words, I'll give you an example. Now, what I did there was 3 things all at once. I connected to it emotionally because that candle does something for me when I choose to light it. I thought about it and I did it. And so I was actually alive in that moment because at least 3 parts of me were engaged in that activity. If one part's engaged, if I just go, like this, that's complete moving center, isn't it? Right? I can do like things like that. I don't even have to think about it. That's dead. It has no meaning whatsoever. So whatever it is that you wish to get out of something, make sure that you at least involve your thinking, emotion, and moving centers at the same time, at the same point. Otherwise, it's a lopsided or one-sided triangle. It'll never yield any results otherwise. Later, you can work on 5 and 7, but 3 is useful because at least you're there. At least you showed up, right? I'm stretching with you, Sachin. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I don't want to take this to a different topic, but I have questions from the beginning that I want to get into that sort of line up with this.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
I may, I mean, if you have more stuff to cover, I'm happy to.
Let me look real quick. Yeah, we've got like 29 minutes. So jump, especially if it ties into the beginning. Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, go for it, Sachin.
Stuart, I'm sorry, you missed the first few parts, so you might have to kind of just listen for a little bit till you get the context. We talked earlier about us being in one universe, the yellow universe. And I get I'm being instigating. Okay, I'm instigating conversation. So don't I completely agree with everything you said. I just want to talk more. So I get the point of, hey, we are in the yellow universe. Great. I get the point that when we progress and go up to 3, we are at close to or at the limit of what we can progress in this universe. So I get the point of there being more than one, but why 5? Why not 7? Why not being 100? Why not being infinite?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to pause there and and I think it ties into 5 centers and the 7 centers. And I think there is some connection there. So that's why I thought I brought up. I think it's relevant, but I'd like to talk about that connection.
Yep, I love it. So I'm going to explain it to you this way then, and then we'll discuss why 5. But first of all, this is you and this is the universe. Now, I did draw the pentagram the other way around, right? The way creation would view it, but this is how we view it as a human having a human life. Yeah. Now I said, so we'll take this as the white universe, and something has to grow and develop. And this is going to really tie things in for you about why this works. Because I said, everything starts with thinking. Whatever it is you think about, then begins this sort of process, right? But it has to be thought about first. You can't accomplish something without having first the thought of it. Do you agree? Yeah. So this area of refinement happens within us. And when that thing gets to the point where it can go no further in the thinking center of you, in other words, it becomes world 3 within you, then it has to pop into another universe, doesn't it? It has to pop into the red one, for instance, in that case. And it doesn't start at the rarefied end. It incarnates this thought or this thing that you're working on, and it incarnates and it makes a progression up its own ray of creation in the red universe inside you. And then it goes to the blue universe and makes a, you see, do you understand what I'm on about? That you are just like creation in this aspect. This is why something has to start with the white, because in the beginning, right? I'm not going to say in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth, but in the beginning, there was only the white universe. It had to grow. It had to grow into the red and then the blue and then the yellow and then the green universes. And now it's a full pentagram, meaning that it can actually do something. Anything lower than a pentagram will either spin or topple. If it's 2, it topples. If it's 3 or 4, it spins, but in different ways. So a pentagram is the first expression that something can actually be done with, which is why humans are so very, very recent on this planet when compared to like a fern, for example. Yeah, fern is just absolutely ancient by comparison. This fivefold expression is something relatively new. So to answer your question, or at least to begin to circle into your question, I would say that there's this aspect that has been said before, as above, so below. That which is within is without, and as above, so below, and so on and so forth. But the reality is that that spark in you, in a microcosmic way, is God. That is the God of your existence. And it has a fivefold expression, and you have 5 different rays of creation within you that you can use to elevate, refine, and add to and grow with things within yourself. You're also something in a much bigger pentagram, in one arm of a very big pentagram. So it would actually be like, you're here, right? Trying to get elsewhere. And you also go through that process, you see. And there are actually 3 levels or 3 layers or 3 octaves, because we haven't talked about this before. I guess it comes in now. You need to know this, that when you take into account the idea of the 5 centers, the thinking center, the thinking part, also has a thinking part. It also has a moving part. It also has an instinctive part, and it has an emotional and a sexual part. So it's not just pure the way it is. And this goes up 1 level and down 1 level. It doesn't go on forever, but each of the 5 centers has 5 centers within it. So, for example, a love of art would, for example, generally be the thinking part of the emotional center. The reason why I say that is because obviously if there's love, it implies something to do with the emotion, but art also has this aspect to it that has a technical nature. It's not just like, we understand balance and harmony instinctively. If you listen to a piano with 1 key out of tune, you will know it every time, whether you've ever heard the scale or not, right? We have a harmony with us. But that harmony comes from the relationship of things. And when you're dealing with the relationship of one thing to another, it almost always involves the thinking center. So there's an elevated view of the 5 centers, that you are a microcosm of the universe, and how I know that there are 5 universes and not 3 or 7 or 12 or whatever, because you Sachin, me, Pierce, and all the rest of us, we are mini universes, because the exact same processes that take place within us also take place in the 5 rays of creation. Now, I can say, you should say, prove it. And I can't say, trust me, but I can say, just be patient, because you will actually begin at some point in time, once you make this development journey and you're like a 3 or a 6 or whatever, you start resonating with the influences of those other universes as well. Did you know that? So you have 5 lives, literally, because if time doesn't exist the way that you think it does, there's not really a past, present, and future with your development. It's just various mechanisms and machines at work. You can connect to you in the blue universe, or wherever it is you came from already. And you get knowings of the blue. Leo had the green knowings and the yellow contemplations, didn't he? No, you don't know, but yeah. This helps shed some light. How can you have a green knowing in a yellow universe unless you've got a bit of blue? You can't. Where does this leave you, Sachin?
More questions than answers.
Well, good, because that's actually my job. My job is not to answer any questions. It's more to get you to the point where you're asking better questions and the right questions. And it sounds like you're there. If I just answer questions, a Q&A type of session, it's maybe useful for my development, but it's not for yours. Because it doesn't involve any active mentation on your part to begin with, does it? So you are. I'm not saying that you're not. I'm just saying that it's good to have the questions. That's a better place to be than to think you know all the answers.
Yeah, as we were speaking, I was looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if you're familiar.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, sure. Yeah.
There's like, there's exactly five needs.
Everything to do with human is 5 plus 2. What I mean by 5 plus 2 is that the aspects of the human that we are not quite there yet, but will be at some point in time as a natural right, have to do with the silver and the gold, or have to do with the what's called the higher emotional center or the higher thinking center, or higher mentality. Those two are already electrically there, but we don't have a physical connection with them until we have done a journey of white, red, blue, yellow, green, and created a pentagram within ourselves in everything we do, actually. And then when that happens, the planet will then be 7-fold, not 5-fold. And creation will have 7 arms, not 5. And it will be basically the inside of an Enneagram at that point. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, 1. That's what the universe is trying to grow into. It's just not there yet. There is a limit to that. It's not going to become a 40,000 armed universe. It never will.
Barely managed 2, so I think one more.
Yeah, barely managed 2. If you're managing 2, you're already way ahead of the game.
Barely. Which means
Right.
I would imagine that the model, would end at 9, and then because then you get 1, 0, which is a repetition.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah. And at one point in time, it was only 3. And at one point in time, it was never less than 3 because that doesn't exist. It's either 1 or 3. It's never a 2-fold universe. It couldn't express if it was.
Yeah, actually, you said that 2 would ultimately topple, but I can also imagine that 2 is just completely static if they're equal and opposite forces.
So there's a huge misunderstanding about how the law of 2 actually came to be. And the fact is that the law of 3 was first. Okay, so you've got the origin, the absolute, whatever you want to call it, God, whatever, doesn't matter. 2 came in when this thing became conscious enough to observe itself and wonder what it would be like to replicate. I've drawn this symbol many, many times, but this is world 3. And then in world 6, it introduces 3 new forces as a replication. That's where the law of 2 comes in. The law of 2 is not fundamental. It is a secondary law. It applies all the way up to the threshold of God in creation, but it is not fundamental like 3 is. 3 came first. Then aggregation. This was what Sachin was talking about before. It's confirmation, aggregation, confirmation, aggregation, just the way cells work. They divide, grow, divide, grow. This is how the rate of creation works too. And you get 3 new triangles. And so now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 laws at play in world 12. And then it does it again. It confirms itself by replication. So that's really where the law of 2 comes in. It's not often useful to look at the law of 2 from the standpoint of how it's generally looked at, which is you've got positive, negative, and neutral. Nah, neutral, not V. Now that's a W. Must be time to quit. Because this cannot manifest. It's just a short circuit. That's just not the law of 2. They are apparent opposites. I'll show you something else too. The law of 4, from that standpoint, doesn't exist either, because The law of 4 is triangles pointing inward towards something. And if you add up the positive, negative, neutrals to all of these triangles in here, you'll see why it spins. You'll see why 4 creates seasons. But again, it's not fundamental. Law of 3 is fundamental. The law of 5 is also not fundamental. The law of 5 is when one triangle, and we draw it like this because of the way it joins with another triangle in a merger, but they only merge here. Okay, they only merge at one spot and then new permissions are created. But again, it's still the law of 3. This is positive, negative, neutral. Positive, negative, neutral is the way that works out.
There's a word when you were drawing law of 2, but I'm not sure it applies, is it looked like an unfoldment. If that applies.
I think confirmation is actually more accurate from the standpoint of, think about how you know yourself. How do you know yourself? You might be tempted to say, I know myself because I'm sentient, I'm self-aware, I contemplate myself. But the real fact of the matter is, you know yourself because of me or because of someone else you deal with, because you get a reflection from others, right? And so it's called confirmation in that standpoint, because in order for 3 to know itself, it has to make 6 so that it can go, oh, that's what I am, right? And oh, that's what you are.
Saying law 3 needs to make, it needs to unfold or needs to create another 3 for the mirror.
Yeah, it's a confirmation. This is also why, if you take this like, it goes 3, which is just fundamental, then it goes 6, which is aggregation, and then it goes 12, 24, 48. What you'll find is the reason why we see things upside down, because I'm only drawing it this way. It actually goes this way because this is a descending octave. But when we look up at the universe, we see everything upside down. We see everything as absolutely backwards to what it should be, because we're looking up at a world that already has a completion in it, and we're missing that bit. We only see one, we only see what we're capable of seeing, which is one big triangle, not seeing the other aspect of it. This has been said many times, hasn't it? Where one of the problems about having a planetary existence is that you see the rest of creation absolutely backwards to what it really is.
The Earth is the center of the universe, somebody said. Oh, wait.
What now?
No, I said the Earth is the center of the universe, somebody said.
Right. Well done. Right. Yeah. Aren't we lucky? Goodness. And all of this just for us, even shit we can't see. Wonderful. Yeah. Who wants to have a quick go? We're going to wrap up soon here.
I always have some tactical stuff if nobody else wants to, but
Yeah, practical stuff. Okay, sure. What? Does anyone want to have a run with me on anything first, or shall we kind of use this to wind things down? Yeah. Okay. Sachin, what's your practical aspect?
Yeah, I was taking notes, and this is learning from Serena, of course, take notes. And so one of the things that I kind of wrote as you were talking about thresholds and decide the rule set, and maybe this is a little bit more negative. It's like how, what is or what could be a process to recognize what that threshold is? So it's a 3-step question. One is there a process to recognize what that threshold is? I'm again instigating. I kind of have an idea. I'm just instigating conversation.
I don't yet know what you mean by threshold. Are you talking about the threshold from level 3 into the next ray of creation, or what threshold are you talking about?
Tactical, related to what we were talking about earlier. Like everybody has to have let's see what I write down here. Everybody should have a set of rules at which point they say no more. Like what are those? It's like what is
will have and won't have area standards. Yes.
Exactly. Yep. So is there a framework to decide, or should everybody have a framework to decide what because I suspect everybody's will have and won't have will be different. Right? I know mine are different from yours. I know mine are different from other people's. Is there a framework for deciding that? And then, so that's the first part. And then the second part is, should it even be decided? Does it even change? Do you even have one? And then the third part is, let's say you've decided that there should be a threshold, and then you've thought through and you have a threshold. And then, of course, that threshold is going to be tested frequently. And then what do you do when that happens? Or is there a framework for thinking? I know this is a big question, so maybe we'll table it and look at it later on. Or maybe you just take
No need to table it. No need to table it. I've realized something about you too, Sachin, that I need to talk to you in threes, because every time you ask a question, it's always 1, 2, 3, or you have 3 points to make, or so good for you. And I'll keep that in mind. But the threshold, first of all, I'd change the word to going back to the idea of criteria, because what that implies is that it's an evolving thing. You can't just go, well, here's my will have and won't have areas, and I call them and I put them in a box called standards, and I stick them on the shelf and done that, right? I'm good to go at this point. The way that you measure your will have and won't have areas is by being tested. And when you come up against something that puts you in the position of having to implement one of your protocols, implement one of your will have or won't have areas in how you will or will not deal with things, and it doesn't have the kind of result that is regenerative or ever growing, then you've reached that threshold where it's time to, you never should put them off the shelf, but you take them back down, you open up the box and you go, well, it was good for Sachin 5 years ago, but Sachin has grown now, and Sachin just encountered this, and it's time for Sachin to implement this aspect to it. So the threshold will happen naturally. If you have a lot of cognizance and wherewithal about the results that you're actually getting in life and getting in your development journey. Did that simplify it? I'm sure you have 3 more questions now.
No, I don't.
No.
No, this is good. I mean, I just have an example of that going on with my life, and I wanted to see if there was a discussion topic to it, because there's
right.
And I've said,
be
great,
tactical. Be tactical. Okay. Keep the emotions out of it. This is the idea of will have and won't have areas. People get it wrong. They think it's some sort of emotional thing, and it's not. It's always very razor sharp and very tactical. In other words, if something isn't working, just change it with zero emotion about it whatsoever, because you're going to end up investing you in outcomes that you cannot control if you do anything but just be surgical with your will have and won't have areas. I recently, as many of you are aware, made a difficult decision. What would be called a difficult decision? It was actually quite easy. It was tactical, right? I had to keep doing this and not mix it with other things. And personally, the attendance is flooding right in here. And this is very interactive. It's been very good, fizzy, strong, all that type of stuff. So the tactical decision was, yes, do that, right? There's no emotion about it.
I think what I would like to say is that it's hard to not have emotion, because usually the thresholds those thresholds have commitment, value, whatever you want to, they have an emotion. At least for me, I've thought through those thresholds and I've spent a lot of time on this is my threshold. Why is it that way? Because blah, 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 blah. What has happened? Didn't work a lot. So now it's now I go back and beat myself up. It's you set that threshold. Were you not thinking? You set that threshold. How did it get exceeded? It doesn't work. So I've got to change something. So I think the hard part is, it is emotional. So I don't know if when you say, hey, let it not be emotional, I think there is an emotional aspect that gets triggered when the threshold is exceeded.
Yeah.
And then you have to just kind of take a step back and think through it. And emotion.
Well, the emotions are always there. The emotional center is always working. It's just a question of how tied you want to be to it, So
yes, absolutely. Absolutely right. And yeah,
the practice
would you want to go to an emotional surgeon?
No,
Would someone
that-
want to go to a surgeon that bases his surgery off of emotion? Like, it's such a nice looking liver. You know, I can't cut this piece out of it because, like, yeah, literally, there are certain aspects of your life that just need to be absolutely surgical in that. And will have and won't have areas is one of those where if it's not working, move on. Yeah, just do it. Get it done.
Two things, just on the surgery. I have this little story is that I had surgery quite a number of years ago, but the surgeon said, well, how are you feeling just before the surgery? And I said, apprehensive. And he said, I'm not. And I was like, the absolute right thing to say.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you have done if he said, yeah, me too?
Yeah, right. It wouldn't work.
I'd be like,
And then the
"Get outta
second
here."
thing is language I use in my mind in this territory, and actually the detection that I do on myself is the distinction between limits. Setting limits to me is unemotional, opposed to judgments. So if I've got the emotional, like extra beef with it,
Mhm.
I know that there's something. I'm not at the core of the dynamic.
Yeah, very true.
So, right, there's something else I need to explore because I'm adding a value system to it. But
Yeah.
if it's a limit, it shows up quite neutral. It just simply says, that's my limit. Now, for someone else, let them do whatever they want. But this is my limit. And so it becomes, I'm cautious to use the word boundary. Could be, but I just say it's a limit. Like it's a place that I don't want to stretch to or stretch beyond right now. I might
Yeah.
evolve that at some time, but it's clear to have that limit at this time.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's been pounded into some of us over and over and over again. The expression that if you cannot become personally involved, do not deal. It wasn't like try to negotiate. It wasn't try to, help, try to find excuses, try to close your eyes to it. It's just do not deal. That's it, right? And that's a very brilliant example of how will have and won't have areas leading to standards should be addressed. It's your surgeon. I'm not, right? That's it. That's it. That's effective. Yeah, good. All right. I feel like this has been beneficial. You guys happy with it? Was it okay?
Yeah. Very much.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good. Okay.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, I thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next weekend. And also in July, I'll be opening up more meetings and doing more things as I'm able to. Okay.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, good morning, whatever the case might be. Let's see.